Hi everybody. Algebra 2 Trig Unit Study Guide. So the very first thing we want to do is just match up some degree values with their radian equivalent measures. So the very first thing we need to remember is on the unit circle. If we start to split this up into the four quadrants right there, well, we should know these degree measures: 0, 90, 180, 270, and then a full 360. But we also need to know the radian measures. So what we need to remember is that if I went one full revolution, I have traveled 2 pi radians. If I've gone 0 degrees, I've gone 0 radians as well. So we can use that idea that the full revolution is 2 pi to say then that, well, half of a revolution is going to be half of that. Therefore, if I go halfway, aka to 180 degrees, well, I've had to have gone pi radians. Well, if I have that again and go only to 90, well, then I've gone half of pi, written as pi over 2. And we're going to use this idea to basically construct everything else. So if I count, if I start at 0, and then I go 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. It tells me when I am straight down, I am at 3 pi over 2 right there. Now let's go ahead and figure out some other important angles on here. So now we'll cut what we have in half. Well, if I'm going 0 to 90, then I've gone 45 degrees. And now we can count in 45-degree increments. So 0, 45, 90, 135, 180, go another 45 degrees, and we're going to go 225, then 270, go another 45 degrees, and we'd be at 315 degrees right there. So again, now let's do the same thing with our radians. If I've gone halfway to pi over 2, well, I have gone pi over 4. I've increased in the denominator by a power of 2. I've multiplied the pi over 2 denominator by 2. That's how you cut something in half. So now I can count by pi over 4s. So 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4 simplifies to pi over 2, 3 pi over 4. 4 pi over 4 is the same as pi, so then I hit 5 pi over 4, 6 pi over 4 is the same as 3 pi over 2, and then finally I hit 7 pi over 4 right there. Well, now let's do a similar thing, but instead of splitting 0 to 90 up in 2 pieces, let's split it up in 3 pieces. So now if you look at these 3 chunks right there, then I can split 90 up into 3 pieces. Well, that means each piece is 30 degrees. So 30, 60, 90. Split that one up as well. 90 plus 30 is going to be 120. Plus another 30 is 150. Plus another 30 is 180. Plus another 30 right there is 210. Plus another 30, 240. Then 270. And then 30 again. And there's 240. 270 plus 30 is 300. 300 plus 30 is 330. And then finally we're back to 360 right there. So now let's go ahead and do this with radian measure values as well. Well, if I'm going a third of the way to pi over 2, I'm increasing the denominator by a multiple of 3. So 2 times 3 is 6, so 30 degrees has to be the same as pi over 6. And now I can do the same thing I did a moment ago. I can count in pi over 6 increments. So 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6 simplifies to pi over 3, 3 pi over 6 simplifies to pi over 2, 4 pi over 6 simplifies to 2 pi over 3, and then I hit 5 pi over 6, and then I hit 6 pi over 6 equivalent to pi, and then I hit 7 pi over 6 equivalent to 210, and then I hit 8 pi over 6 simplifies to 4 pi over 3, and then hit 9 pi over 6 is going to simplify to 3 pi over 2. 10 pi over 6 will simplify to 5 pi over 3, and then I hit 11 pi over 6, and then I hit 12 pi over 6 equivalent to 2 pi. So I can get all the values around the unit circle just by splitting it up into fractions. Now hopefully we don't need to go through that whole process each time. Hopefully we remember enough of them that we can do it a little more effectively. So for example, if I was starting this 1 through 6 right here, the very first thing I would do is I'd be like, oh, well, 0 is the same as 0, so I know that 4 has to be A. And then I'd also do 360, right? 360 is the same as a full 2 pi revolution, so right there I would get E for 2 pi. And then I'd start splitting things in half. Half of 360 is 180, and so half of 2 pi is pi. And so I get C for that first one right there. And I'd split 180 in half again, because half of 180 is 90, and half of pi is pi over 2. So I get that right there, so I get B. Half of 45 then, I'm sorry, half of 90 is 45, and half of pi over 2 is pi over 4. And so I get that bottom one right there is D, which means 30 has to be pi over 6, which it indeed is. And so I get F for option 3. Hopefully we know these values fairly easily, and we can figure out anything else we need to by drawing a little unit circle and splitting it up into equal fractiony pieces.